Anno Domini 2021, in honor of 9.1.5, blessed be thy name. Amen.
Well, what do we have here? So, Blizzard came out with the announcement explaining what they plan to add in 9.1.5. There's going to be a video for that and for all of the things they are planning to add, but for now we are talking about what is taking the spotlight, which is of course everything related and around your covenant. The main thing, the main course being obviously the fact that now in 9.1.5 you will be able to freely swap between covenants. Now, before we go over and sing the praises of this change, we have to start with the negative parts, okay? We have to start with the criticism and the annoyances around this change. Number one, this is classic change in Blizzard style, right? They release a piece of content that players have been telling them is clunky, is convoluted, or maybe not necessarily bad. The general idea isn't necessarily wrong, but the way in which it is implemented, maybe the time gating, maybe the restrictions around it, maybe the freedom of the character to access the system is somehow, in some way, bad. This is shrugged off by Blizzard, most of the time by Ion Hazikostas, the lead game designer, a lawyer, a warsmith, very good when it comes to slithering away and not getting baited into bad questions. Nothing comes out of it until several months later, sometimes several patches later. Blizzard pretends to be praised because they are giving us the solution. Hey, look at this, we are fixing this problem. And people are like, yes, but you made this problem, and we told you it was a problem a year ago, so what are you fixing? So in 9.1.5 we see that the covenant swapping comes live and that the Conduit Energy is being removed. Those are both things that people didn't want since the start. People didn't want to be locked into a single covenant and didn't want to have this weird as fuck system like Conduit Energy, which didn't really look like it served any purpose whatsoever. And Blizzard has always been very, very stubborn when it comes to this idea of covenant by framing it as a very important role-play choice. I don't know if you remember all the way back into the beta when all of the news started rolling out related to Shadowlands. There was this point about how Shadowlands would have had more role-play connotations, that they wanted to bring the RPG back in the MMORPG genre, that covenant choice would be very important. I still remember the interview of Ion with Preach, where Ion was saying something like, I don't want you to see yourself as a Fury Warrior, I want you to see yourself as a Ventir Fury Warrior. In Shadowlands you're not going to be a Frost Mage, you're going to be a Kyrian Frost Mage. This was their idea, wanting to make the whole thing around the Covenant choice very important. This is something that players would have gotten behind by. They wouldn't have an issue dividing themselves between Ventir, Necrolord, Nightfae, and Kyrian if, this is a big if, it's quite large in fact, if it didn't include player power, as well as player choices, versatility, and variety in their playstyle, which comes in forms of abilities, or talents in the case of Soulbind trees, for example. Once you put those into the game, and you lock them behind the covenants, that's when people start getting annoyed. You know, if you made all those 4 abilities and all of those soulbinds detached from the covenants and allow people to freely respec among those abilities and among those soulbinds while still being locked in a single covenant, so only being able to use the mounts and the transmogs and the titles given by one covenant, only being able to enter a single covenant hub, only being able to use the followers and the buildings and the campaign story of one covenant, while still having access and still having the choice to pick between the 4 abilities and the 12 different soulbinds, people wouldn't have had a problem with the covenant system. At the very least, not as big as what we have now. They would have mostly not cared because the power of their character wasn't being touched. The versatility and the diversity in their choices were not being touched. So they're like, sure, whatever, I'm gonna have to choose by aesthetics. You know, that's it. So the announcement of Blizzard reads as follows. When it comes to the limitations on covenant switching, millions of players experienced Shadowlands for the first time through the lens of their covenant of choice. And that would have not been possible had the choice carried less weight from the outset. Now, we have a problem here. This entire sentence is being framed as this is something good. Like, you have to thank us. You have to thank our initial decision of locking you into a single covenant, because if we didn't do that, you wouldn't have been able to have as good of an experience because your choice would have carried less weight. So it would have been worse. You wouldn't have felt as good. That is just wrong. I guess they had to brainstorm some type of way to still make it look like they thought the initial choice was very good from a roleplay perspective, and not because it was considered the best possible way to guarantee the best possible playing time in the game, because respecting Covenant takes time, so longer play times, etc., etc. I don't think anyone would have minded leveling through a single Covenant if they knew that as soon as they hit max level and as soon as they finished the campaign, they could immediately freely respec to a different one. I don't think the entire experience would have carried any less weight whatsoever. Nevertheless, they continue. After the conclusion of the Chains of Domination campaign, the Covenants are united against the Jailer. If you're still a little bit behind the storyline, this might be a spoiler, but in a classic Blizzard style, initially there is conflict, initially the Covenants are wary of each other, they don't trust themselves too much, and then in the end, with the power of friendship, they all come together, they band together to face the bigger foe, in this case the Jailer, Zoval. So at the end of 9.1, essentially all the Covenants are working together. So in their minds, after revisiting player feedback in that context has led us to reevaluate our approach. In terms of the day-to-day player experience, the advantages of this rigid division between Covenants have diminished since Shadowlands launched, while the downsides have only gone up. So, feeling disadvantaged in certain types of content, if you want to do PvP and Mythic Plus and raids effectively, you might not be able to because the best possible setup is locked behind a Covenant that you are not part of, or maybe even just if it is the aesthetics of the Covenants themselves. The balance of factors no longer justifies the original limitations on Covenant switching, so in the next patch we are looking to provide a way to circumvent them. Now that we are done criticizing this move, because I still think it's late, I still think it's something that was done not really and not fully because they thought it was the best possible choice for the game, and more so because they had some sort of player engagement numbers in mind, how to get players to log in the most type of reasoning. I think that had more to do with the choice than actually being convinced that locking you into a single Covenant made you care for the Covenant more, or some weird reasoning like that. We can look at it from the positive side. Of course, it's an amazing addition to 9.1.5. It's great because not only do you get to now finally have something that you've been asking for a long time, but if we have to be honest, this is likely what they would have done later down, past 9.2. At the very best in 9.2, more likely in 9.2.5, so several months from now. This is a little bit too early. By Blizzard standards, when they fix something they themselves broke, usually it takes a little bit longer than this. Yeah, even in a positive light, this is still not very good for Blizzard because it still took a year to fix this. So it's still not that good, but at least it is coming earlier than expected. Of course, people are gonna be saying, well, duh. Of course, they have gotten a lawsuit against them, they have been firing top division heads left and right. The player engagement is lower, and even if they can continue telling their investors that WoW is making more and more money than ever and is growing more and more than ever, they likely know that at the very least in terms of sheer player numbers things are not as good, so they had to pull this out earlier than usual, right? That's generally what people are going to say about this change coming at this moment. But besides the reasoning as to why it came now, it is certainly good, because this is one of the things that will effectively get you to play more. This is like when, for example, you are playing Frost Mage and you are barely doing 1 Mythic Plus per week just for your cash and nothing else. It feels like things have gotten a little bit stale, and then you respec to Fire Mage and suddenly you are playing multiple Mythic Plus per week, you're actively looking to get into the raid, maybe you even start trying PvP. Why? Because you're excited, because you haven't been playing Fire Mage in a long time, you haven't been trying the same thing in a long time, you start looking for different weak auras for your character, different, rotation guides and videos, trying to set up your new character because things have changed, things are new, so it gets you to play more. The change in Covenants can have a similar feeling. maybe you have not been that into Mythic Plus right now. But maybe, if you were given the option to play Ventier, you will start playing Mythic Plus more because it's new. You get to play with a new Conduit system, a new Soulbind system that you have not been playing before, and a new ability. Maybe even better, you are one of the classes, one of the specs that is divided between two covenants. One of those, my Necrolord is better in Raid, while my Kyrian is better in Mythic Plus. And because I Raid, I play Necrolord, but I really would have liked to play Kyrian in Mythic Plus. Now that this patch comes in, you will be able to do that. So it will get you more into, it will give you more of an incentive to play. This time, not because Blizzard is drip feeding you content, not because Blizzard is time gating the content or making it grindy, but simply because you're excited to play your character, which is the best type of reason to play the game more. And for me, for example, it will be the same. I have been playing Necrolord as a raider, but now in this patch I can go and play Kyrian as Restoration Shaman. I can go and try out Ventier as Restoration Shaman in Mythic Plus, for example. And I'm excited to do that. And it will be a reason for me to play more. That is a good way to get people to play the game more. More options is always a good thing. Now you have your class, which might have different talent settings if you're changing Covenant, which might also have a different rotation if you're changing a Covenant, or a different priority at the very least, and even different legendaries, for example. Now you have even more incentives in gathering Soul Ash and crafting different legendaries and getting to play with different legendaries, purely because now you have the freedom to play different Covenant settings. And now Covenant-specific legendaries gain even more value, because many of them are pretty good, many of them are pretty valued, and now their value is higher because you get to try them all. You can use them all in different Covenants. Again, talking about just my Shaman, for example, the Ventier legendary is very good, as well as the Kyrian legendary being very good. And if you're playing Elemental, even the Nightfall legendary is very good. And in 9.1.5, I will be able to play all those Covenants with all those legendaries. So it does give you a way higher incentive in playing the game. The other reason why the change is very good is because it comes at virtually zero cost to Blizzard. Question: what did Blizzard have to develop to enable this change? How many hours, how many manpower hours had to be put into this change? What did they have to develop? A new dungeon, a new raid, a new class, a new spec, an entire new set of balance tuning and raid tuning and whatnot? Zero. All they had to do is allow you to change covenants. Basically, probably a few lines of code and nothing else, which I thought since the start would have been a better way for you to get to play the game. Other than saying, we know how we're going to get people to play the game, we are going to lock them into a covenant, and it's going to take them roughly 40 hours for them to be able to max a different covenant if they want to change. That's going to be more playing time. I do think you could have gotten that amount of playing time, allowing them to respec freely simply because they are more into the game. This way, you make them happier because they are doing the content they enjoy, rather than regrinding for the 5th time a different Covenant storyline or regrinding Renown again while still playing the game. Except now they're not frustrated and they're not angry, or maybe they're not quitting because they don't want to do it. So even after praising the change, it is still kind of bittersweet. The fact that we got, in the end, the usual switcheroo of Blizzard of only making the system better a few months, sometimes a year after it has been released in a worse state. We have seen Azerite armor in BFA, we saw legendaries in Legion working this exact same way, we saw corruptions working this way within the cycle of a single patch in BFA, in Nyalotha. And inevitably, once again, Covenants fall in the same category. I'm pretty sure if we had a poll right now, most people would have said the same. Most people would have thought eventually Covenants would have been able to be freely swappable, but most people would have said perhaps in 9.2, perhaps between 9.2 and 9.3. So I think we all knew this would have come in the end, or towards the end in classic Blizzard style, except now it came earlier. That's the only difference. However, one thing we have to point out now is that Blizzard didn't lose all of its old vices, because remember that, yes, in 9.1.5 you will be able to freely swap Covenants, but if you are a spec that has been playing a single Covenant since the release, think about, for example, Shamans, Restoration Shamans with Necrolord. Perhaps you are a DK, an Unholy DK playing Necrolord, or maybe a Vengeance Demon Hunter playing Kyrian. If you respec, for example, from Kyrian to Necrolord freely, or to Night Fae freely, or to Ventier freely, you will still have 1 Renown, no Covenant story progress, no buildings progress, no followers in your mission table missions, nothing. So yes, you can freely swap to them, but no, they are not ready to play. They are still going to need grinding. So they are still going to need that amount of hours you have to sink into before the Covenant itself is, playable at a decent level. So the old Blizzard vice in trying to find a way to squeeze as much playing hours as possible is still here. It will still require quite a few grinding hours for you to get that. They are adding at the very least a tiny skip, which is going to save you quite a few hours, which is completing a Covenant campaign on one character will allow alternate characters the ability to skip that same Covenant's campaign, earning the Renown and the third Soulbind unlock immediately. So, at the very least, you will not get to 1 Renown. As soon as you respec, you will get all of the Renown from the entirety of the campaign, which should be like 15 or so. You will get it from the start, and you won't need to spend any hours actually doing the entire story. So you will actually be able to spend it doing something else. Mythic Plus, catching up with the Renown and whatnot. It is still, though, quite little. Remember that we are going this patch from 40 Renown to 80, and likely 9.1.5 will come out as we got to 80 Renown. So, great, you used to be Kyrian the entire expansion, now you can freely respec, you are respecing to Ventier. Luckily, one of your alts already did the Ventier campaign, so you can start at 15-ish Renown as a Ventier without having to do the story. And now you need to get to 80. You still have no followers for your mission table missions, you still have no buildings built up, you still have basically no working and functioning soulbinds because you are at 15 Renown, so it's gonna take a while still to get that up. I hope that in the future, so in the next few days, and we get more info about this, we will get also some extra news about catching up with all of this. One way to start your followers, for example, at a higher level, one way to maybe get to build or have buildings at a certain level already when you respec, rather than having none of them ready and even having the cooldown, right? The time that it takes for them to build one at a time to slow the process even more. I think that should also be looked at. If you are giving people the ability to freely respec covenants, you have to understand that many people will have 3 covenants basically completely untouched, unused, zero progress on them, and they would have to start them from scratch. So you need to give them a sort of like a bump, a catch-up system to make them go up faster. Otherwise, it's going to be way too grindy of a process. The last of the additions related to the Covenant free swapping is the removal, the death of Conduit Energy. Luckily, this abomination of a system is being removed. The entire system was very bizarre because it was basically completely irrelevant to people playing a single spec. For example, in the ones I mentioned, if you play just Vengeance as a Kyrian, if you're playing just Restoration as a Necrolord, if you play just Unholy as a Necrolord as well, you didn't really change many conduits at all, so you barely ever felt Conduit Energy being a thing. Meanwhile, if you were the opposite, if you were a Druid, for example, playing Balanced Druid as Night Fae, Restoration Druid as Night Fae, and Guardian Druid as Night Fae, maybe even worse, playing the exact same Soulbind for all 3 specs, it meant that every single time you wanted to play one of those specs, you had to change 3, maybe 4 even, different conduits. And Conduit Energy in that setting was terrible. You were getting to the point where you had to decide with 3 days left on the week if you wanted to finish the week playing with tank conduits or with DPS conduits, because you wouldn't have any more energy after that choice. And it's just bad, because you don't really understand the reason for this existing. It's not even one of the old conspiracy theories about Blizzard wanting to drip feed the content, wanting to make you grind more, because Conduit Energy didn't even work like that. It's not that you had to go and grind something to give you more Conduit Energy. It was just an arbitrary limit that just stopped people from enjoying the game with no possible gain whatsoever for Blizzard. So it's good that it's gonna die, but it's coming very late compared to how much this system was being complained about since the beta. So with this, we have looked at this change related to the covenant swapping. I am sure we're going to get more news related to this entire system as the days go by. We're going to go and have a different video when it comes to touching all of the changes that Blizzard is planning to have in 9.1.5, but of course, this one being the main one and the more drastic one deserved a topic, a video on its own. Let me guys know what you think about it, besides the obvious fact that you do think it's coming late because this was being told to Blizzard months and months ago, etc, etc. We are already aware of this, okay? So thank you guys for watching the video. If you want to continue supporting the channel or start supporting the channel, you can leave a like, comment down below or above. I don't know where you have your comments set up. One day even think about subscribing. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I might actually be able to play something other than Necrolord on my Shaman after a year. God bless.